Do you remember your first word? Probably not, although you may remember what your parents told you was your first word. Every parent holds on to it as core knowledge. I can remember distinctly that Aiden's first word was car, and Kieran's first word was Aiden. Oh, to be second-born, huh? Well, even if you don't remember your first word in English, perhaps you remember the first word you learned in another language. If you learned it in a middle school classroom, it was likely a word of greeting. Bonjour, guten Tag, or something similar. As adults and adolescents, our first words tend to be hello or good day. It wasn't more than a month ago, at our Thanksgiving Day dinner, that I was able to look around the Undercroft and greet folks with Jambo, Salam Alaikum, Hola. Sometimes words of welcome are the only words we know, in Swahili or Arabic, for instance. And perhaps that's appropriate, for it expresses an interest in those to whom we're speaking, even if it sounds a little like babble to our native interlocutors. As it turns out, the babbling of babies is actually that, a form of language. It's their own way of saying hello to the world. Linguists who have studied babies demonstrate that babbling often falls in four distinct categories. They have different sounds, and they elicit different responses from those gathered around them. The first is QRV, and it stands for quasi-resonant vocalization. And it's those really kind of nasally, creaky, kind of sounds that babies make that parents usually identify as fussing. The second is FRV, which is fully resonant vowel. In around 3 to 4 months, the baby's vocal tract opens up enough that they're able to produce these more open, kind of adult-sounding vowels, like ooh, ah, like when we see fireworks. Babies are just opening up to the world. The third is MSFR, or marginal syllable, when babies start around 6 months or so to throw consonants into the mix. Finally, around 9 months, the baby advances to the canonical syllable. These are those nice baba, mama, dada that parents usually associate with babbling. And they're so excited to finally hear it, they hear it as speech and get excited to interpret these non-words as words. Sorry. She's so advanced, of course she is. All of this is significant because when babies babble, what they're saying is that they're emotionally ready to begin to learn. Babbling is also performative. That is, it's in the form of actual babbling that they're increasing their arousal level and putting themselves in kind of the optimal state of being ready to learn, over and above when they're just quietly sitting and looking at an object. Of course, language, at its core, is performative. It calls into being the very possibility of relationship. And while we don't tend to notice it, the baby is creating the very conditions for relationship with its caregivers in the world all around. We sometimes imagine that it's the father or the mother that plays the role as educator, but the baby is playing as much of a role in this interaction as the mom. By changing the way that they babble and what they're looking at, they might actually be changing their opportunities for learning, because they're changing what the parents say in return. Ball. Yes, ball. It's called a social feedback loop. So when the baby babbles, mom responds. The way mom responds actually will change in real time with what the child says next. And they go round and round in this conversation, influencing each other. It is in this context of this play that language emerges and begins to perform us. It's perhaps one of the reasons we struggle to learn as adults. We're generally not willing to babble. and communicate our interest to learn with our new cross-lingual friends. We just don't feel free to play. But play we must. During the season of Christmas, I think we're all a little bit more attuned to the nature of play. As we watch our children, grandchildren, nieces or nephews playing with the toys they've got under the tree. And whether there was a baby or not at your Christmas celebration, Christmas puts all of us into the child-rearing, baby-cooing phase. As former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, puts it, God comes among us as a child, vulnerable, wordless, dependent. And he calls forth from us a love that is the most natural and unforced in the world. That tender sympathy, even overprotectedness, so that many of our carols speak of. We declare our intention of rocking and cuddling him, of letting him sleep. We tiptoe around the cradle, hushing each other and smiling all the while, in that great and universal conspiracy of baby worship. I wonder if we spent time around the manger, what we may have heard. It's quite doubtful that the carols are accurate in describing the situation. Listen to this one. The cattle are lowing. The baby awakes. But little Lord Jesus, no crying he makes. Now every parent around the world must have blinked with incredulous envy at that particular miracle. Never mind the angels and the star. A baby who doesn't cry when surrounded by a herd of hungry cows? That's something of a prodigy. Babies, in fact, may be wordless and dependent, but they're not, as a rule, passive or quiet. No, they make their presence felt. They alter the nature of our lives. Their dependence is a matter of fingers clutching at ours when we'd like to get something else done, of broken nights, hungry mouths at the breast, the need to be taught and watched and entertained and brought into the world of human speech and language and relationship. If God is with us as a child, he is certainly with us as one who calls out our tenderness and compassion. But he does so by the insistent presence without shame or restraint, crying and clutching. He is the God who, Rowan Williams reminds us with St. Augustine's unforgettable words, penetrates my deafness by his violent, loud crying. Indeed, God calls for our attention, both with the cry of hunger, but also with the babble of discovery. In both cases, God upsets our notion, our dependence on control. The child can tell us only by crying, and we have to wait, tending and attending patiently till it becomes clear what the problem is. Through all the stages of babbling, we have to wait much longer before we can find out how to speak together. At first, looking into that little scarlet face and the screaming mouth, we're confronted with something strange, alien, and uncontrollable. So far from the divine child being a cipher, the tool of our schemes and our systems. No, he confronts us with the alarming, mysterious, shattering strangeness of God. This is how we like to imagine God. This is not how we like to imagine God or language itself. We like it to make it a bit tidier, more controlled, and thus we write all those carols of this miraculous baby. Rarely do we consider the actual. I mean, have you ever paused to wonder what Jesus' first word might have been? I know I haven't. Have you ever considered what it means that God was learning human language? I mean, when we think about God speaking, we generally think about it from a vantage point of all power. In the beginning, God spoke, and all things came into being. God said light, and there was light. You remember the story, right? Rarely do we imagine a God who stutters and sputters, and babbles. Of course, today's prologue from John's Gospel has little room for babble at all. No, it speaks in bold and clearly articulate terms. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But what was that Word? How does the fact that God came down to learn our language shift our understandings of the way that we speak? Today's gospel text reads like how we imagine that we can and will learn another language, with mastery and control, just 20 minutes a day on our app, Duolingo, or better yet, Babbel. But in reality, it is anything but that. We learn in fits and starts as our very fleshly vocal cords open and allow us to begin to utter vowels and consonants. We learn in silent observation, through self-arousing babble, and through failure, making awkward mistakes, embarrassing ourselves and delighting our listeners. For language is always in play and at play. God came down to learn human language not to display mastery and control, but to invite us to understand the world in a new way. In Jesus, God invites us to own the babbling nature of our language and the strangeness of our world, to understand that we must be humble and curious, not arrogant and judgmental. Yes, God came down as a silent word to destabilize all of our systems of control. The God of the stable and the God of the cross is always free and in play, just like our language. His weakness, his wordlessness, is his power. And it passes annihilating judgment on our efforts to be right and secure, defended by God against others, always against the others. This is the freedom that's promised in today's reading from Galatians, that we were imprisoned and guarded under the law until faith would be revealed, would be our disciplinarian, keeping us to mind our P's and our Q's. We no longer need that law because we have the Word. And what is that Word? Well, it starts in a child's cry of discomfort. It makes way to a contented babble of an infant, and then eventually silence when we come to that ultimate place of suffering. That Word is Jesus, the truly human one, the one who reminds us of our humanity, and just how wonderful and messed up as it may be. A sense of understanding that is always at play and full of wonder. The Word that is Jesus tells us not to take ourselves too seriously and miss out on the play of true learning. Yes, Jesus is the Word of grace. It gives us permission to make mistakes, to babble and to cry, and to know that God joins us in both. That together, like mother and child, we are creating a shared language through a social feedback loop. It gives us the freedom to know the acts that we do and the choices we make, for we have no choice but to make them, are human acts. That they'll fail, they'll hurt others, even when we don't intend them to. But ultimately, they must be offered to God in humility and hope and trust. That the acts themselves are part of our learning to be creatures, truly human ones, not some dazzling epiphanies of God's righteousness inherent and dwelling in us on earth. No, we're human, just as God is human. The word this morning is that Jesus empowers us to forge a new developing language in which we and Christ may speak to each other as we patiently wait with him. We learn through babble and through play that we're never fully in control of our language and certainly not our world. No, we learn best together and in humility. The word that Jesus reminds us is that we need more conversation partners, not less. So here at St. Luke's, as we continue to follow Christ's call to welcome the stranger and the foreigner, may we remember that Jesus is the Word. Yes, in Jesus, God speaks to us. Let us rejoice that God is not like the silent, passive, swaddled, dull-eyed, glass-eyed, wax-limbed figure of our whitewashed and anxious minds. No, on this happy morning, we give thanks that the true God is with us, sweeping away our tribalism, our moral smugness, and our religious fuss. That all the idols will fall and perish, but the inarticulated crying and the incomprehensible laughter of a real fleshly child will wake us up from our death-like sleep, and to life will begin. The life of a patient and loving attention to our great lover, our great mother, the slow learning of a new language and of a new world that we can share with God. That's a great gift for this Christmas season. The opportunity to learn and to play, to make mistakes and to grow, to be a child again. And tomorrow we have a whole new year to start trying to live that way. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Amen.